Hello, everyone. This is Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, guys, I have author of Burning a Bus and starter of Burning a Bus, Victor Tiffany, with me tonight. He is going to discuss the book, and he's going to discuss the Unrig summit that he was at over the weekend in New Orleans. So, Victor, please welcome to the Soapbox once again.
Thanks for having me, Jamal. I really appreciate this.
Not at all. So, Bernie or bust? How did Bernie or bust get started? For those who are not up to speed on this and who don't know what this is, who was living in a rock somewhere, just came out the desert. What is Bernie or bust? How did that start, and how does that have progressed up to now, even going into the creation of a book?
Well, it began as a conversation on a street corner in late April of 2015. A friend of mine, we were discussing possibility of Bernie running as a Democrat or as an independent, and if he runs as a Democrat, that they're just rigged against these kind of insurgent candidacies. So what are we going to do about that? Maybe we'll just put him on a third-party ballot. Well, if we do that, then he'll sue and get his name off the ballot. And a friend of mine said, well, what about a write-in campaign? At that moment, I thought, that's brilliant. So we ran with that idea, although it turned out to be quite stupid. Just a quick point about that intersection where that conversation took place. It was a very intersection of Meadow Street in Ithaca, and I swear I'm not making this up, the very end of Clinton Street.
No way.
I didn't even notice that until after the DNC. I knew it was Clinton Street, but I didn't realize it was the very end of Clinton Street until after the DNC. And I thought, well, that's appropriate.
That is appropriate. It's like this kind of cosmic irony of it associated with it.
So the rest of this story is all laid out in a book that finally got published this weekend. I spent 20 months putting in 5 hours a night of sleep because it not only included all that time leading up to the DNC, then on to the general election in November of 2016, but I spent another 5 months writing after my work, my 8-hour day work, this book, Bernie or Bust, Pioneers of Electoral Revolt. And then I finally started being able to sleep a little more like a normal human being again. And it finally came out this weekend after a long, difficult editing process and proofreading and so forth. And
congratulations.
So thank you. And just this afternoon, right? So it's on the publisher's website, and I want a shortcut to get to it. And I thought, oh, I'll just go grab BernieOrBust.com. I'm pretty sure it's available. It is available for $3,295.
Oh, wow. No way.
What are they thinking about? They must think, oh, this guy's got a book coming out. We'll just bend his arm and we'll make sure. So if you want to get to the book,
don't put, as a Clinton supporter who's like, I'm gonna get that rat bastard for
I have no idea who's sitting on that book or that website, that URL, and why it's sitting there at $3,295.
Like, that guy's gonna write a book one day, and when he comes around, I'm gonna learn him something.
Pay for this. Yeah. So it is BernieOrBust.info, INFO. In the book, in the introduction of the book, I suggest that if you start to read this book and then you find it's lying around collecting dust, give it away, share it, pass it along. The idea of purchasing this book, which is a little expensive for a paperback, is to pay it forward, right? The idea, my hope is that for every purchase of this book, it'll be read by 10 different people. The idea, and then I remind people at the very end and the very conclusion, thank you for reading this book, appreciate your time. Now pass it along. Give it to a Democrat, give it to an independent, give it to somebody who doesn't understand why we need a revolution in the United States. It is fundamentally aiming to foment revolution in the United States, with or without Bernie at this point.
Now explain that. So I agree with your philosophy on this, and I'm gonna let you explain it. But I agree with it right off the bat. I have this. Well, in fact, I'm jumping ahead. Explain why you believe we need a revolution, and explain how you think that revolution comes about from the Bernie or bust concept.
Well, before there was Bernie or Bust, I was an author, writer, and commentator on a website called the Amendment Gazette. We were working to defend the logic and build support for the 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United and all related decisions. And so in 2014, I had been working on this for 2 or 3 years. And in 2014 was the I forget their names, the Page and the other guy's website, Benjamin Page, and not website, the report that the United States is not a democratic order, that what the regular people want in Congress, they don't get, but what the special interests want, the high price special interest, the corporate interest, and the plutocrats, what they want, they have a much better chance of getting through Congress. Yeah. And this is not a democratic order. They did all but define the United States as an oligarchy. So between that and listening or reading the columns by Chris Hedges in 2014, I came to realize we're not going to get this amendment through Congress. This Congress is bought and paid for by fat cats, corporate fat cats. And as Chris Hedges says, this is a corporate state. Well, if we live in a corporate state and it's not a democratic order, what are you going to do about it, right? The problem is we can't just go through the normal process of electing people who support us, who support the 28th Amendment or progressive policies or anything like that, because the whole system is rigged now. Not just rigged in so many different ways. I learned through the Bernie or Bust process, the electoral systems themselves, the polling machines, the electronic machines, the servers, they're all wide open to hacking. And that's been proved now by DEF CON 2017, when they brought all those voting machines into this conference and invited hackers. And there's not a safe voting machine in this country. They are all open and vulnerable to hackers. So, but my thinking back then was, it's just rigged by money. How do you defeat money? Somebody spending $4 million for a highly contested congressional seat with a grassroots campaign that'll be fortunate enough to raise $1 million. How do you get that $1 million person raised? You can't. Instead, we're going to need a revolution. Now, a lot of my friends originally thought I was referring to a violent revolution. Mm-hmm. And I make it clear in my article on the Amendment Gazette that violence will only strengthen the tendencies in the United States, which is one other reason we need a revolution. We are drifting toward greater and greater fascism. And this was under Obama. This wasn't under Donald Trump or George Bush. Under Obama, we had, the persecution of whistleblowers. We had the NSA spying on every one of us. We had no privacy online at any rate. And it's just in so many different ways, no action, insufficient action being taken on climate change. You had all the above coming from the neoliberal President Obama. So we need, for a variety of reasons, and I didn't even know at that time about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I knew it was out there. I had no idea that this was an attempted corporate coup over the United States. And so, that's not even part of it. It is part of Chapter 1 in Bernie or Bust. That whole essay is copy and pasted into Chapter 1 of Bernie or Bust, and then I add more about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So that's the fundamentals of why we need a revolution in the United States, a peaceful revolution. And at that time, I had no idea, but I did conjecture maybe some independent candidate will come along and self-fund and somehow get the kind of support needed. And then it wasn't a month or so after I published that in the Amendment Gazette that I read an article, an interview in the Washington Post with Bernie Sanders. And I heard him say to the reporter, yeah, this country needs a political revolution. My eyes popped out of my head, and I just thought to myself at the time, wow, he'll never repeat that again. What? That's just going to throw all kinds of water on his campaign. And then, of course, he ran it as a revolution, and we took that very seriously at the time. And then between the time that conversation took place in late April at that intersection of Meadow and Clinton Street, and the time we launched the website on June 22nd of 2015, it dawned on me, And my co-founder, Revolt Against Plutocracy co-founder Patrick Walker, knew this the whole time. It turns out when I read his part of Bernie or Bust, it's co-authored with him. Mm-hmm. And I read his part of Bernie or Bust, and I realized, oh man, he knew this the whole time. But I more or less discovered that the idea of setting up a write-in campaign, if Bernie doesn't get this nomination, screw you guys, we're going to write him in anyway.
Yeah.
That's leverage. We're basically telling the Democrats, you're going to lose this election in November 2016 if it's not Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
And then later on, it dawned on me that not only is it leveraged during the caucuses and it's leveraged during the primaries, but it's also going to be leveraged during the DNC.
Yes.
So we went down to Philadelphia. By then, we had a spokesperson who popped up on CNN saying, "Yeah, I'm Bernie or Bust, Yane Endigo." I saw that. I finally got a hold of her through Twitter, and she agreed readily to become our national spokesperson because it's not something I wanted to do. I'm not really I love speaking in front of an audience in terms of just normal public speaking, but camera work and just interfacing with the media is not my
not your bag.
It's not my forte. I can muddle through it. I can get through it, but it's just not really my thing. So when she popped up, I mean, she's just a true natural at that. I don't know if you've heard her speak or not, but she's absolutely amazing speaker. She's charismatic. She's a powerful speaker, public speaking wise, and she's very good in the Q&A with the media. So
the name is
grabbed her, and it turns out she's based in Philadelphia. So she and her team down there were able to put together just this amazing week where we started off with actually she held an event on Sunday night in Germantown, separate from Bernie or Bust, and then she made space, not made space, but saved space or established space available just outside of City Hall for our press conference on Monday afternoon, or just before noon. In fact, it was 11:30 a.m. And then helped us set up a space at I'll think of it, a square across from City Hall. American Revolutionary Thomas Paine Plaza across from
nice.
across from City Hall, where we held the Bernie or Bust Plaza. And we also had a billboard that we purchased between the airport and downtown, which so that the people flying in, the super delegates, almost couldn't miss it. That's stated in no uncertain terms: nominate Sanders or lose in November.
Is it Ben Franklin or Thomas Paine, the one who said if you're willing to it's essentially out of cowardice, if you're willing to give up your rights out of cowardice, then you're not going to have either security or freedom in that way? I can't remember which one.
Yeah, it wasn't cowardice. If you're willing to give up your liberty in the name of security, then you deserve neither security nor liberty.
That's it.
That's Franklin.
Okay.
Franklin's the only president of the United States who was never president.
Never president of the United States. Right. Man, you have no idea how much I fundamentally agree with you on this. So this was something I hit my head on. This idea of leverage. And I realized that, in the 40s, you could say you had all these other groups, socialist leftists. You had all these guys pressing on the apparatus who could say, if you don't feel this aim, we will feel the same. So essentially, you need to lean a particular way or else. Well, that goes away. And at the point where it goes away, you're stuck with a Democratic Party who...
The Red Scare.
Right, Red Scare. You're stuck with now a Democratic Party who has no fear at all. The only thing that it's afraid of at this point is it's not even afraid of Republicans, because they know ultimately to get back their seats. Once people get sick of Republicans, they'll run back.
We think they're more frightened of progressives within their own base than they are of Republicans.
Well, they are, but Democrats as a whole are more frightened of Republicans. In this case, they run to Democrats, if that makes sense. It's like they'll run to their Democratic leaders to protect them from the Republicans, not necessarily realizing that you're giving the Democrat a free pass. It's like, I'm terrified of Donald Trump, so I'm just going to vote Hillary Clinton. And it's like, but you don't like anything that Hillary Clinton is going to do. It's like, she's not your candidate. Yes, I understand that, but I'm just terrified of Donald Trump. And you perpetuate this for the next 20 years. Every election that for the last, in my political awareness, Democrats have ran on a campaign of, we're not them. It's like you have nowhere else to go. You're terrified.
We're not them. Is that what you said?
We're not them. Yeah, we're not them. It's like their basic campaign literally boils down to Republicans are insane. We're the normal candidate. We're the basic human being. Vote for us. And the argument that you'll find, like when you were in the 2016 campaign, many of the arguments they would make against Jill Stein and all this other stuff would end up being, well, hey, I mean, Donald Trump is insane. Don't you want Hillary Clinton? And it's like, but she's not. I guess my feeling is this. If you're representing an interest, and if you're telling me that you're for, I'm for Green New Deal, I'm for this, I'm for that, I need to actually believe it. And I need to actually have some leverage on you when you don't fulfill those obligations. If you're going to always vote for the Democrat, regardless of the situation, then no matter how much you stomp your feet, no matter how much you bitch and moan about it, at the end of the day, they know that you're going to vote for them because you're terrified of the Republican, in which case you have no leverage. That Democrat can be whatever that Democrat wants to be because they know at the end of the day, regardless of how much you moan, complain, protest, and all this other stuff, you're going to go to that lever and you're going to pull the lever for whoever that candidate is of the Democrat. Leverage.
There's a polling that indicated most people who voted for Hillary Clinton voted against Donald Trump.
Yeah. It wasn't for anybody. Like, I guess that's my point. Democrats, my mom one day, I've said this before, I've noted this before, because it's one of those things where I tried to make the point to her, and I tried to make the point to her using her as the point, where she's like, well, Democrats have to change. I was like, why do you believe Democrats have to change? She says, well, I mean, you can't continuously be this bad. I mean, certainly they realize that there's a problem. And it's like, but you voted for Hillary Clinton. Yeah. But it's like, you get what I'm saying? Like, you understood that there's a fundamental problem here. You understand that you're not getting any of the things that you want out of a politician. You understand that she ran her campaign essentially saying Donald Trump sucks. There was no affirmative message of what she was. You couldn't even explain why Hillary Clinton wanted to be president other than it's her turn. And yet you still went and pulled the lever for it because you were terrified of the other guy. What happens in 4 years when it's Ted Cruz? Is that the same scenario? Or is that not the same argument that you're going to get that you got last year? What happens when it was Mitt Romney? What happened when it was John McCain? That you can, perpetuate this in the future for 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, 16 years.
It's moot now, but at the time I was thinking, if it's Ted Cruz, we might just call this thing off. Because he did scare me. He really
terrifying.
is.
He is terrifying. Because he's not incompetent. Like, that's just, like, Donald Trump, at least you can say, okay, he's incompetent. Maybe he's not going to get it. I suspect Ted Cruz will have those guys falling in line, and I think we would be in for theocracy, like this kind of religious. Oh, man, he's terrifying.
This is a tangential conversation, but I just want to bring it up because we're talking about, who's worse, and Ted Cruz is dangerous because he's competent.
Yeah.
There is a push out there, and it's coming from people I respect, people I like, trying to impeach Donald Trump. And I just think to myself,
Pence is
why
worse.
do you want Mike Pence to be the president of the United States?
Is worse. Pence is worse.
He is worse. So, and I met this guy at this conference. This might be a segue. I met the director of Free Speech for All, and they're some of the people who are pushed. John Bonifaz, that occurs to me. John Bonifaz and others at Free Speech for the People, who are promoting the 28th Amendment, are now promoting this impeach Trump effort. And I ran into him. We had a conversation walking toward the chapel, which is where we weren't going to church. We were just going to is where some of the presentations were. And he was going down to one about the 28th Amendment that was hosted by Cenk Uygur. So we had the conversation. As we got close to the chapel, I said, I don't understand why you guys are promoting and supporting the impeachment of Trump. And his response to me was, so you're going to let him get away with the abuse of power because you're afraid someone else is going to use power? Yeah,
exactly. Hillary Clinton. That's literally the vote. I mean, that's literally the argument for Clinton. I mean, it's like we're terrified of of Donald Trump, so we're voting in Clinton. And in this case, he's making the same argument to us. So you're going to let him get away with abuse of power because you're terrified of Donald Trump? I mean, of Mike Pence. Look, Mike, it's not that. To me, it's you had Bush invade a country on a false pretense, in addition to breaking international law and our own laws in regard to torture. They gave him a pass. George Bush is out there finger painting right now. What are they doing this? Like, what's their basis for Donald Trump on this? I don't understand. If they catch Donald Trump with something, that's one thing. But what is his rationale for the impeachment when all of these other presidents have abused power like nobody's business? What's their,
You know, I did not think to ask him that until afterwards. I tend to be reflective rather than thinking on my feet. And afterwards, it dawned on me: were you trying to impeach Obama for the assassination of an American with no due process? I mean, that's a pretty damn high crime, murder. But I'll bet you he never even crossed his mind.
Without even justifying it. Eric Holder goes out being Obama's mouthpiece saying, well, judicial, what do you say? I distinctly remember this because I thought to myself, that is an amazing statement. He's essentially saying due process under law doesn't necessarily have to go through the judicial branch. And it's like, wait a minute, you just said that the president of the United States can kill whoever the president of the United States wants to kill. And the media looks at this as like, okay.
I know.
Like, okay. I know. Like, wait a minute.
It's not only the media, Jamar. This happened in 2011. Romney didn't say a word about it. He could have used this right in a political score points during the campaign. They're all in it together. They don't care. The Republic is lost because we have a world empire, and what matters is serving as the ends and needs of the empire, not the Constitution.
Never hear a Republican utter a word about the military excess. Outside of a Rand Paul, because let's be honest, Romney will be using the exact same power that Obama was using. I am waiting for the day where Trump uses that same power and murders an American citizen. That's what I'm waiting. And you're going to hear the Democrats, oh my God, he just killed an American citizen. This animal, we must impeach immediately.
I know.
When I give you a perfect example, when Obama was locking up whistleblowers left and right, like putting people in prison for espionage violations when they weren't espionage violations. And, you reveal that the United States was mass surveillance, illegal mass surveillance. Nobody goes to prison. Nobody gets, in trouble. You reveal that a Reuters reporter gets gunned down by a military pilot when they didn't even know who they were killing. Again, that gets swept under the rug. The person who revealed it is the person who gets locked up. And Obama is locking people under espionage. The moment that Donald Trump comes in office, Donald Trump starts complaining about whistleblowers because he had all these leaks in his administration. Democrats scream, we must protect the whistleblowers. Donald Trump is going after whistleblowers. We must protect the whistleblowers. And it's like a breathtaking level of hypocrisy in real time. And it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
It is. People just wear these messed up ideological blinders.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example of blinders. As you know, you interviewed Kelly Lane, and we're following up Burn Your Bus with a new strategy that's applicable to all seats across Congress in every state and every congressional district, called CFAR or else. CFAR is the Contract for American Renewal, which we're asking candidates to sign. And our position is, if you can't CFAR, you might just be a neoliberal. So we're going to target candidates who refuse to sign this contract for defeat in November.
Yeah, explain the contract just for people who don't know.
It claims it's legally binding, even though it probably, and when I say probably, I really mean certainly, will not be upheld in a court. When I flew down to this conference in New Orleans this weekend, sitting next to me on the airplane was a sitting judge. Then I asked her about this, and she said, no, I would throw it out. So think of it as a gimmick, but it's an extremely effective gimmick. And what it is, it lists 11, the template that we offer candidates to pick and choose from offers 11 litmus tests, basically, is what they are. And including Medicare for all, pulling out of Afghanistan. We've added a couple more special prosecutors, independent special prosecutors in the case of fatal use of force by the police was one that we added about a month and a half ago. And most recently we added election reform, right? Basically replacing these electronic machines that are so hackable and with paper ballots that can be hand countable paper ballots, transparent audits of elections, inexpensive or free audits, automatic audits in close races, things like that. But the idea is to get rid of this current system we have, and almost nobody, at least at that conference down there, was talking about this particular concern as we witnessed in the Democratic primaries last year. They're talking about, you know, hacking in the general election, which didn't really happen. There was election fraud, but there wasn't the kind of hacking that we certainly experienced in the discrepancy between polls, exit polls, thank you, and outcomes, election outcomes. Huge discrepancies that should have thrown the results out. Of course, unfortunately, Bernie Sanders didn't even challenge these results. He just let it slide and moved on to the next primary, and then never did turn around and challenge this. Unlike Tim Canova, who is challenging the primary race between him and Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida. And when he filed that lawsuit, somebody, not Wasserman Schultz, but somebody connected to Schultz in some way, threw those ballots out in violation of the law.
Yeah, so there's that. Good on Canova for challenging that. Good on him.
Yeah. So we have these policy positions that the candidate can look at. They can download a Word version of this document. They could take any number of these things as suitable to their own congressional district and their own political philosophy. Throw out some. In fact, we don't recommend using all 11 because it's kind of you have to imagine a Venn diagram, right? Each one of these policy positions has strong popular support. The weakest is 55 to 60% for Medicare for all. From there, it goes up to 93% in support of overthrowing Citizens United, which I found out at this conference. You don't use that phrase if you're a candidate unless you're talking to activists, because 15% of the public understands what Citizens United is.
Oh, so that's sad.
It's terrible. And that comes from the group. This isn't just somebody who wants this sort of thing. This is information that comes from the group called End Citizens United. So they know what they're talking about, but they've done polling on this. So what they recommend from candidates is talk about campaign finance reform, talk about, fixing the system, that it's corrupted, that it's rigged, and that you're going to go down there and do something about it. But don't mention the phrase Citizens United. It just doesn't sell to the general public. So at any rate, that's one of the policy positions we have. And we have a pretty special approach to it that we modified just before we went to New Orleans last weekend, which was, instead of overturning Citizens United with a constitutional amendment, which could take decades, some people down there were very optimistic. Jeff Clements says, it's going to be a few years. I think that's wild-eyed optimism. I think it's going to be 2 or 3 decades, maybe 15 years. At any rate, there's another way to approach this, and we spell this out by making use of what's called the exclusion clause of Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. That section of the Constitution lays out the duties and jobs of the Supreme Court and the federal courts, and is to review and make sure laws are constitutional, with exceptions as outlined by Congress. So it's a very small phrase. Most people hardly ever notice, I think. But the fact of the matter is, Congress can pass comprehensive campaign finance reform, and basically, pursuant to the exclusion clause of this Article 3, Section 2, tell the Supreme Court to stay the hell out, to not even rule on this, to stay out. Yeah. So you're not overturning Citizens United as much as you're doing an end around. And in the next Congress, assuming that the Congress is not plutocrat, in other words, blue and populist. We're aiming for a blue-green populist wave in this election. That's the whole idea of CFAR or else. You either sign on board to this populist CFAR manifesto is one phrase I like referring to the contract as, or else you lose and we'll end up with a red Congress. But let's assume we have a nice progressive or left-leaning Congress and Senate, and they actually pass comprehensive campaign finance reform, and the president, who campaigned on how corrupt the system is, actually signs this thing, we'd be done. You'd have comprehensive campaign finance reform in place, and if they actually use the exclusion clause, Supreme Court wouldn't be able to reference or address it in any way. Now, what if this leads to a constitutional crisis? And it might. You have the court, which has marshals. You have Congress, which has Capitol Police. They're both pretty small forces, roughly a draw. And you have the president, who has the could call up the National Guard, the Army, the Navy, the Marines.
Right.
Basically, it's the president who's going to say, this is the way it's going to be.
Or else.
Or else.
Right.
That's right.
Start packing the court like FDR. Like, we're going to add more. It's like, well, it never says how many people we can have on the Supreme Court. We have 20 people on the court.
It's something that's never been used before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I brought this up during a Citizens United session at this summit last weekend. And there's only one guy. I'm not sure who he is. I've never seen him before. He's a lawyer or a legal professor or something. And he said, no, the ball, we're too far down beyond Buckley v. Vallejo, which is a 1976 decision that equated money with speech. We're too far down the road to cite the exclusion clause. But read the Constitution, Professor. It doesn't say anything about the status of law out there. It just doesn't say. It says Congress can exclude the courts from addressing this particular bill, and it's their prerogative. They can do it. It's actually kind of a scary thing if you think about it, because they could institute martial law.
Right. So the court has nothing to do with any of this.
This could go either way.
People look at the Supreme Court as being this kind of unbiased body. At least they used to when I was small. And maybe that was just me. And I'm pushing what I'm thinking to everybody else. But I remember, at least from my own understanding, the Supreme Court used to be looked at as this bipartisan thing, where it was just kind of beyond politics. It was apolitical. They're just reading the law, and these guys are the word of God from the standpoint of the state apparatus.
That's what they claim.
That's what they claim. And then somewhere along the way, you realize as you grow up, oh, these guys are these guys are biased as can be. Republican puts the guy on, and so at that point, you know how the guy's going to vote. His vote is a canned vote, and vice versa. What I realized, this is just boils down to arguments. It's the argument that you make to get across whatever you want to accomplish. So you have Republicans stopping Obama from putting somebody on the court. Now, Obama could have said, look, you guys are doing this. This is illegal. I'm putting my person on the Supreme Court. If you need to take him off, you take him off. I'm putting him on the Supreme Court, and let it go through the trials and all this other stuff and force him to do it, as opposed to saying, I'm not going to do it. You make the argument. Like, the whole point of law is just the argument and interpretation. How is this law going to be interpreted? I guess I'm saying, I understand what you're saying. You're saying, look, this is on the books. So regardless of what they want to think of it, it's on the books. You make the argument for that particular thing to see if you can get that thing accomplished, and if that thing will hold up to scrutiny. I don't blame you. What's the harm?
Well, even if it doesn't work, it's still basically primarily this whole contract is first and foremost a tool to get left populists elected to Congress. And the nice thing, the important thing about this tactic is that they work. All right. Newt Gingrich and Republicans used the similar sort of tactic called Contract with America in 1994, and they took a House of Representatives for the first time in decades using this gimmick, this tactic.
Also, he was using it for Texas, saying raise taxes and all this other stuff.
It was similar, but it was just a pledge. This is more of it's not a. I have to be careful because I know it's not going to be legally binding, but we're calling it legally binding, and it is a contract and not a pledge. But that is kind of a precursor to exactly what we're doing. And there's also another politician who used a contract with voters during the campaign, and he was elected, and he's very famous. Yeah, any idea who that would be?
I have no idea who that would be. He's the
president of the United States.
Wait a minute, Donald Trump?
Donald Trump had a contract on his website.
Oh, wow. Look, there's another positive aspect to this. It gets out of this language thing. Like, so Paul Ryan comes up and says, I'm going to get rid of Medicare, and I'm going to make, you guys more free. You're going to have freedom. Freedom is going to be all over the place. Of course, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about freedom for people with cash and means and everything else. But he would use that language as if he's benefiting somebody in a positive way. The beauty of the contract is it gets rid of the language. Like, that slimy language goes away. Are you going to do this? Yes or no? Yes. And you judge your person based on whether they did what they said they was going to do. I love that. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, the reason we liked it, the reason I glommed onto it when I saw it, when it was presented to me by the primary author, John Rachel, is because we were thinking about some, following up Bernie or bust for the midterm elections with broad sort of progressive or bust. And the problem with that was, how do you determine who's progressive? Because a lot of neoliberals claim to be progressive. I've actually seen the phrase recently, progressive neoliberal, which is people like Hillary Clinton. And for me, it's a complete contradiction in terms.
The funny part, just to interject real quick, on the debate stage when they were having the DNC leadership thing, and they said, which one of you are progressive? And everybody on that stage raised their hand. Every last person is like, okay, well, just bastardizes the name at that point.
So this contract separates the wheat from the chaff. I mean, it really makes a big difference. I want to get, before we get to Unrig Summit, I just want to give a quick example here locally how this is panning out. We have 7 Democrats vying to win the primary next June here in New York. One of them has signed the contract, and the others haven't. But the local progressives, both here in Tioga County and in some other county, have endorsed this guy named Ian Golden. The contract signer is a school teacher and a union organizer. He's a head of a union, right? So he's a labor guy. The Ian Golden that these progressive organizations around here are supporting, endorsing, is a small businessman. He's a capitalist. So you have progressives here locally voting to endorse a capitalist over a labor guy.
Wow.
When did that become a progressive thing to do? I'm thinking to myself, just stop calling yourselves progressives and start calling yourself pragmatists. He's good looking. He's good looking. He's a businessman. He can compete with the incumbent Republican in another business. If that's your thinking, fine, but stop pretending you're progressive, for goodness sake.
It's like
there's no way a progressive is going to pick a capitalist, a small petty bourgeois capitalist, over a union organizer. It's just mind-blowing. And in this case, why Victor is becoming extremely unpopular around here is because I keep telling him it's CFAR or else, people. In other words, if the candidate who signed the contract doesn't win the primaries, we're not supporting the guy who does. Yes. We're not. That means if you pick any candidate other than the CFAR candidate, the Congressman Tom Reed, Republican, is going to get reelected, period. You can hate me until you're blue in the face, but that's just the way it's going to go.
Agreed.
Because this businessman, if he was so progressive as he claims, and he's not, because the only thing on his website that's very clearly, distinctly progressive is Medicare for All. The rest of his platitudes about fair trade and nothing explicit, unlike the contract, which calls on the member of Congress, if elected, to advocate and introduce a resolution to the president to pull out of NAFTA and CAFTA, very explicit actions, right? He doesn't talk about any of that. He just gives platitudes about fair trade. What's that mean? Come on, spell it out. It reminds me of a lot of his platform reminds me of the better deal. I think he's a neoliberal, and I can't understand why these so-called progressives around here in Tioga County and elsewhere are voting for this guy. Other than, I guess, he's a great speaker.
The CFAR or else thing is important. I scream about it because I don't scream about CFAR or else thing. I just scream about this thing of you support the person who represents your interests. If you get stuck in this thing of being complicit and saying, okay, this person doesn't represent my interests, but they get my vote, it's almost like you're giving more credibility to having that come around again. It's like how often, if you think of the ridiculousness of year after year after year, voting for the same thing over and over again and hoping at some point that it changes to be in your interests. It's like you're supporting something that's clearly not in your interest. You're paying the garbage man, even though the guy's not picking up the garbage. There has to be an else. If there's no else, if there's no or else, if there's no man waiting at the door, these guys do whatever they want. It's like you put somebody in office, that person does whatever they want in that office. There's no consequence. The consequence is the or else. I agree, man.
This is actually a very exciting and important test case of this whole strategy here, because first of all, it's my district, right? So I'm sort of hands and feet on the ground.
Your reputation's on the line.
Well, a little bit of that, a little bit of I'm more likely to be hated after this than liked. But I'm not interested in a popularity contest. If I was, I wouldn't be doing politics. But we're going to have to figure out a way to help this teacher union guy, CFAR candidate, win the primary. So coming next Monday is actually a good test case, because here in Ithaca, at a big state theater, historic state theater, the Democrats are having a straw vote, right? So any Democrat can attend this thing. The candidates are going to speak. I don't know how long. There's 7 of them, so hopefully no more than 5 minutes each. But I'm going to do what we asked the Bernie or Bust pledge takers to do all across the country for caucuses. In a primary and a general election, you can't do electioneering at all. You can't hand out literature anywhere near the polling place. That's not true in a caucus. You can electioneer in the caucus. You can electioneer up and down the line, people waiting to get in the caucus. And we took advantage of that. This is the internet. So we made sure people had a little quarter sheet flyer. We asked them to print this thing out and mass produce it and cut it up and get there early, go to the front of the line, hand out this little quarter sheet flyer that said, it was a kind of a warning, there's this Bernie or Bust movement going on. And if you don't nominate Bernie, my God, we're going to lose in November. We don't want another Nader situation here. So you better nominate Bernie or screwed. Something like that. I don't have it in front of me. And so we started, we refined the technique. Initially, we wanted people to sort of yell this out during the caucus. And in Ohio, very few people did. And Bernie narrowly lost, probably won it, but supposedly narrowly lost.
It's like 0.1% or something.
So it was horrible. So we went in Nevada. I said, let's forget going inside. Now start handing out these flyers. But I was concerned in Nevada that these people might get confronted and maybe someone might push them out of anger. Oh my God, So I asked them to sort of put on a little disguise, go to the front of the line, hand this thing out, go back to their car, take off the sunglasses, change their hat and shirt, and go back and get in line. And not very many people did it. I think it kind of scared people. So after that, I said, well, screw it. If they get punched, they get punched. just go for it and do it. And he never lost another caucus. So I'm going to do that here at the State Theater this weekend. I'm going to print up little flyers. There's a bunch of people pledging. And remember, Bernie or Bust was a voter pledge.
Right.
It was a pledge that people would either write in Bernie Sanders or ultimately vote for Jill Stein if he's not the nominee. It was a pledge. It was a voter pledge, which has some leverage teeth to it. Mm-hmm. And so we have a new a CFAR voter pledge. So I'm going to go and hand out flyers, letting people going into this event know that there's hundreds of people who have signed this CFAR pledge. They're only going to support CFAR candidates come next November. So you better pick the CFAR candidate tonight, which is Rick Gallant, or else Tom Reed will get reelected. So I'm going to try it again. It's on the ground. It's kind of exciting for me because it's the theory is CFAR or else. That's out there. It's kind of a theoretical strategy. Going to this straw vote, standing out front, getting there early, standing out front, handing out these flyers and to people going into this theater to cast a straw vote in a straw poll. That's practice, right? This is the beautiful blend of theory and praxis in one evening of a straw vote. And we'll find out. We'll see if what happened in the caucuses actually plays out here in Ithaca next Monday night at this straw vote that the Democrats are holding.
Any predictions?
No, I'm really bad at predicting the future.
Fair enough. No, man, I like strategy. I think it's necessary. Now, I gave you an example when they were talking about the Unity Commission when the whole DNC thing, and they were like, "We're gonna have a Unity Commission. We're united. Mind you, they're lying the entire time when they're talking about you were united because you don't have a Unity Commission if you're united. When 15 million people leave your party, that's the opposite of united. So they decided to have a unity.
That's why they held it, because they're panicked about that.
Yeah, they were panicked. They're freaking out, like, holy shit, we lost 1,100 seats and all these people left. We lost the House, the Senate, Supreme Court. We lost the presidency to a maniac. So they say we're going to have a unity commission. And I say the entire time, I said, I would give you credit if you guys get the stuff through. Meaning, if the changes that you guys get through, I would give the stuff credit. I said, but understand that your strength is the fact that these people left. Like the only reason that you're having a unity commission, meaning the only reason they're having this conversation, the only reason they have Nomika Kant's, waving her head and her earrings bobbing, and she's giving them the shit or giving them the business, is because they were terrified that these people were leaving. The man at the door, the leverage, was the fact that all these people had left, and they were terrified that those people weren't coming back. Now, the moment that they started forecasting and they said, hey, we can win the House and the Senate, there's a good chance that the House and the Senate would turn blue. Unity Commission, what? Unity Commission who? What Unity Commission? They started saying, they was like, yeah, they're resisting the changes. No shit. No shit. I did a video saying, I told you so. I told you that the moment that they realize we're not afraid of you, the moment that they realize those people are so terrified of Trump, they're running back to the party. The moment they realized that the Unity Commission went away, Tom Perez could have implemented those changes by Tom Perez himself. Tom Perez didn't do squat. They didn't even come up with a date to have the vote for the final Unity Commission thing. Like it was, that stuff, it started to go away, and people started to balk at the things that they were agreeing upon the moment that they realized we can take the House and we can take the Senate. Unity, why? Yeah. Why do we need it now?
Well, we got news for them. We're not the least bit interested in unity. If candidates don't sign this contract, the House and the Senate will probably stay red. And as I stated in sort of my concluding comments this weekend when we made our presentation, that's the worst case scenario for CFRLs, right? Yeah. The worst case scenario for Bernie or bust was Donald Trump, which was a pretty bad scenario. The worst case scenario out of CFRLs is what we have now: a red House and a red Senate. That's the worst that could happen.
Well, yeah. Let me give a shout out. Bernard Foster, thank you, man. I appreciate your contribution. Guys, I absolutely appreciate the super cash when you guys give it. It is much appreciated. Bernard Foster, Bernie, Paula Jean, Allison. I actually like Paula Jean. So I met Paula Jean at Paula Jean Swearengin. She's in West Virginia. She's running in West Virginia against Joe Manchin. Now, I've asked the question, if Paula Jean loses, is the Young Turks going to support Joe Manchin? I'm so curious about this. So, like, you have no idea how curious I am about this question. Met Paula Jean. Go ahead.
I have met Cenk Uygur previously, just Sunday before the DNC in Germantown. Yep. And then he did this 28th Amendment session last weekend, and afterwards I went up to him. I said, I want to bend your ear, but it's busy right now. You got people in line to talk to you, so I'll just reach out to you on Twitter. And he said, no, here's my email address. So I emailed him. I'm asking him to cover, not support, not endorse, just cover, like a news agency, cover this strategy, CFRL. Go to our website. We've got 22 candidates who have signed this contract. It's not, some imagination off the top of my head.
Right.
It's something that's underway, and so just cover it. We have a spokesperson now. Like I said, you interview Kelly Lane. Cover this. This is a story. Just cover it like a news agency should. And so far, I haven't heard back from them. So I wouldn't be surprised. I think the answer will come tomorrow when I don't get an answer. When they don't cover CFRLs, the answer will be yes. They will endorse Joe Manchin.
I'm so curious about that, because my feeling was, it's like, I guess I'm wondering, like, do you automatically fall in line? I guess that's the question I'm ultimately asking. Do you automatically fall in line to support whoever the Democrat is? And if you just are willing to support whoever the Democrat is, does that not just make you another arm of the Democratic Party? Maybe a left-leaning arm, but an arm of the Democratic Party.
That's what they don't like. I mean, this whole idea of using leverage and drawing a line in the sand and saying, sorry, we're not crossing this line.
Yeah.
If the progressive does not win the primary, screw you, I'll vote green. I'll write in our case, the or else means that we will write in a CFR candidate. If that means, people who took the CFAR voter pledge, look at their computer monitor and use their finger to draw their signature on the contract itself, and then go and vote and write in their own name.
Right.
That lives up, that allows them to fulfill the CFAR voter pledge in 43 states where democracy is still somewhat legal.
It needs to be loud. I mean, it needs to be over. Like, it needs to be one of those things where it is clear and understood that you do this or else. That's
yeah. Well, the problem we're having, and it was the problem with Bernie or Bust as well, was raising enough money. All right, we're still a bunch of nobodies. We're a committee of people nobody ever heard of. Maybe Nico House is somewhat famous, but by and large, we're a bunch of people that nobody's ever heard of before. So what we, the fat cats who can really afford to donate enough money to make this loud and clear all across the nation just aren't going to throw $100,000 in our direction, and that's too bad. I mean, I think eventually, if we keep doing this year after year after year, I think we'll get the reputation of being honest and having integrity, and people will be able to come to trust us and say, "Oh, these people are serious."
Serious, yeah.
And so, I think we can trust them with our money. So we do have the PAC, and in fact, one of the things I'm on the verge of doing is registering with Crowd PAC, so that we're no longer interacting with Act Blue, and we get to keep 100% of the donations that way. So we're aiming to get louder, but volume costs money. I mean, that's the whole problem with campaign finance anarchy. The one who has the most money has the loudest voice because he can pay for or she can pay for the most ads on television. And that's why the system's so rigged right now. And although there is a trend, particularly with young people, millennials in particular, but even Gen Xers are getting more and more of their information not on television or the radio, but on the internet. And that's where our cost of advertising can get much, much lower. And hopefully we'll be able to reach a lot more people and make and convey this message. Take the CFAR voter pledge and commit yourself to standing for progressives, and don't reward the Democratic Party when the voters buy all this stupid campaign advertising on television and turn around and pick in a primary someone like Joe Manchin. If Joe Manchin wins that primary, screw it. Just write in your own name, or write in, the woman running against him could do her very own leverage strategy. She could run as a Democrat, and this is what we were actually thinking about before the contract came along, was sort of the original write-in idea, right? Have candidates run as Democrats in the primaries with the threat that if they lose the primary, I'm going to run as a write-in candidate. That was the original idea, and she could still do it. Any Democrat can do this, right? Run as a Democrat in 43 states where it's still permitted. Run as a Democrat, and if you don't win as a Democrat, run as a write-in candidate. And maybe you'll lose, and the Republicans will win, but that's okay. What difference does it make if you have a neoliberal Democrat or a neoliberal Republican?
Republican, yeah. It's like, if I'm not getting anything done.
The answer is social issues, right? Abortion, prayer in school, all these other issues. And I'm not saying they're unimportant, but economically speaking, in terms of whether we need a revolution or not, they're both horrible, and they both need to be overthrown through all legal means.
And, there's something to be said that if one of the parties is supposed to have this philosophical responsibility for, the poor, the disenfranchised, the people with the hard luck cases, those type of things, and they completely ignore that philosophical responsibility.
Yeah, that's what we have a Green Party for.
Yeah, right. Rewarding them for that is not so much. I don't necessarily see it as a good idea to reward them for bad behavior. Let me ask you this. So let's talk about the Unrig Summit. So the Unrig Summit was the Unrig the System Summit, February 2nd through February 4th in New Orleans. I didn't get the chance to go, but you did get the chance to go. So what was the Unrig? Okay, two questions. What was the summit? And just an overall impression. No, three questions. Let's start off with what was the summit first. Let's start there.
Yeah, it was they tried to make this as transpartisan as possible. So they had some Republicans speaking, which is kind of nice to hear Republicans speaking out against Citizens United. And they had, you know, Republicans talking about a number of other things, and Democrats, of course, as well. And the idea with the summit was to, you know, reach across the aisle and work with, in a transpartisan way, Democrats bipartisan, and try to get this, deal with things to get this system unrigged. So there are all kinds of sessions. They had a session for candidates, to advising candidates on how to run. They had a session, particularly along the issues of unrigging the system, overturning Citizens United. Don't use that phrase. So they had those sessions. They had a donor session, which is basically not, it wasn't what I thought it was. It was agencies that give money to, not to candidates, but to other democracy enhancing organizations. They had an off the schedule presentation by, I wish I could remember the name. Oh, the Matrix, the Democratic Matrix or something like that. Democracy Matrix. Basically, it's a website that they're building. It's still under construction, where you're going to be able to go and register as a citizen and fill out some forms, fill out some survey questions, so that it frames you as a voter with values, and then it associates you with, well, certain values, right? You could be a conservative voter.
That sounds funny. A voter with values.
Yeah. Specific values is what I meant to say. So that then you get associated. They sort of point you toward the candidate that matches your values. Is kind of nice that way. And then they have, and they evaluate the candidate by these people who analyze the candidates' news stories and websites. So they have these analysts out there, thousands of analysts doing this work of analyzing all these candidates across the entire spectrum. I don't want to spend too much time on this matrix because it was just one session, but it was very exciting. This idea of having a website that can match candidates with voters ultimately is their ultimate goal for that. There was 2 or 3 sessions on Citizens United, including the one hosted by Jake Uger. There was our session. So we were co-sponsors. I don't want to get into this right now because this might be a third question at this point. But broadly, this wasn't some big progressive effort, because there were conservatives. There was a Fox News host, Steve Hilton, is the host of The Next Revolution, which happens to be the only sort of talk, conversation, non-news program I watch on mainstream media, corporate media, is The Next Revolution on Sunday nights. It's actually fairly good. And the way Steve Hilton sort of talked about Citizens United on his show made me think that he considers it a free speech issue, and he wasn't particularly interested in turning it over. But when he talked at the seminar, at this Saturday morning opening plenary session, he followed somebody who said, we've got to overturn Citizens United. And he said, I completely agree with that previous speaker. So he's not as right-wing as he seems to be sometimes on Fox, on his show. Tabby.
Tabby. I know you're talking about the Democrat
woman from
Tabby, Hawaii.
I
can't. Jesus Christ!
Boy,
the way you started the name is this thing in my head. My brain's.
I'm drawing a blank on her name.
Gabby.
She was one of the speakers.
I love that woman. I can't think of her name to save my life.
Yeah.
It'll come to me. To me.
Nina Turner was a speaker and a moderator in one of the sessions. She was a speaker at the plenary. And then they had fairly open-minded, at least about how rigged the system is, Republicans, an ex-congressman and a current congressman. So they had all these different kinds of sessions. And I think in terms of what they were trying to accomplish, it was extremely good. I have no complaints about within the confines of what they were trying to do. I think they did a pretty good job. They didn't have anyone out there too far to the left or anyone out there too far to the right. And I think that's kind of not a good thing, right? Because we really need to hear from the extremists. Although I don't think I don't think we want to have racists talking about,
Well, right.
we
Yeah.
we should rig the system and black people shouldn't vote.
Right. Shouldn't get to vote. It's like, while we're at it, women voting is a horrible idea. Get them back in the. Yeah. You know what? Yeah. There has to be some level of So, look, at a certain point, you're not going to be able to talk to the people because they're going to be disrespecting other people in the meeting. So I understand. Yeah, there has to be a certain boundary. First, I'm done voting for the lesser evil, Bernard Foster. Good for you. You have a CFAR member right here, Bernard Foster. I agree with you, Bernard. I agree with you. At some point, it has to change.
Bernard, you should go to our website, cfarmovement.us, and sign up as a volunteer. Right, we're building an army. Bernie or Bust had three parts. It had the candidate, Bernie Sanders. It had the voter pledge, and it had activists out there sharing links to our website to get more and more people to take that voter pledge. It was a platoon, about almost 150 people at one point working on this. Well, CFAR or else is built based on the same model, right? We have CFAR candidates, so the CFAR manifesto is a substitute for Bernie Sanders. We have the voter pledge, the CFAR voter pledge, just like we have the Bernie or Bust pledge, and we're building a platoon of activists. In fact, we have a meeting tonight at 9:30 where we basically get together. We'll talk a little bit about this summit this last weekend and how we're going to organize to pursue going forward. And we're also have, this is kind of exciting. I met with Nick Brana. Right, mm-hmm. It's not the first time I met him. I knew him pretty well, and I'd heard that they were going to discuss the C4L strategy this coming Thursday on their national conference call. So he made arrangements to bring me into that call. Nice. So that's another thing we discussed last weekend. There actually is going to be a vote. Movement for the People's Party is going to take a vote as to whether they're going to embrace the C4L strategy for the midterm election. It doesn't mean we're always going to be, allies, but for this coming next 9.5 months, they will take a vote on whether we will become allies. And their whole thing is, of course, not Democrats. So they will be out there recruiting Green Party candidates and Justice Party candidates and third party candidates to be the genuine progressive alternative to these neoliberal Democrats.
Very cool.
Who won't sign the contract. Yeah, it will be if the vote goes our way. I'm very excited about it.
Not signing the contract is a clear, if somebody enumerates, like, you've heard that. I'm pretty sure you heard Yuckmouth, Joe Yuckmouth's speech. I don't like calling him a Kennedy because he, in no way, it feels like, I don't like going from JFK to this guy who's now Joe Kennedy. But Joe Kennedy would never sign that pledge. Now, Joe Kennedy would give all sorts of platitudes. He would tell you all sorts of things that you could never really pin him down on, but he would never actually sign the pledge. It's one thing to say, I believe that people should have health care. I believe people should have ponies, and I believe people should be able to fly to space anytime. You can want people to have all sorts of things. The pledge itself is nailing down, this is what I will support when I go to Congress. This is what I will
work on.
In office. Yeah.
Not just support, but actually actively engage in promoting, whether it's a resolution to the president to pull out of NAFTA and CAFTA, or another resolution to the president to pull out of Afghanistan. And there's another way that Congress, of course, can pull the purse strings out of the war for the war in Afghanistan.
It's the
that's a pretty brave position to do, because you've got Republicans going, he's not, he wants to starve the soldiers. Doesn't want to fund the soldiers. And basically, it's a very courageous stand to take. Think about just that one policy position on this contract 50 years ago. If this was, we want candidates for Congress to make a binding commitment to go to Congress and pull out and do everything they can to get us out of Vietnam, that would have been a huge, big deal just by itself. Now, pulling out of Afghanistan is just one of 11 litmus tests that we want these candidates to sign on to. But you're right about that. In fact, I would love to have somebody work on Joe Kennedy, right? I don't know him. I would love someone in his district to start working on him the same way I worked on Congressman Ro Khanna. I don't know if you know this story or not. I saw him on Twitter just tweeting something about a policy position, and I said, it'd be great, Congressman, if you make a binding commitment to do this. when you go, if you for the next Congress. And we had a little back and forth. He followed me, he's the first member of Congress to follow me on Twitter. So I was able to private message him. And I introduced him in a tweet to the contract. And he came back with this fairly standard line. I don't like contracts. Newt Gingrich had a contract. I didn't agree with it, blah, blah, blah. So I fired back. Twitter, of course, is 280 characters now, so you have more room to make an argument. I fired back with the question, when did Democrats decide Republicans should have a monopoly on effective campaign tactics? And I agree with you that the contract with America, Gingrich's contract, was horrible. It was elitist and it was right-wing. So that was on a Saturday. I did that tweet. Sunday rolls along and no reply. And I'm thinking, well, he's just not going to sign. Meanwhile, I found out the guy named Mike Honda is running against him.
Yeah. So
I went on Facebook and asked Honda if he would sign the contract. And then I went back to Twitter, private messaged Kana. And this is what or else means originally. Sign the contract or else we'll ask your opponent to sign the contract. That's what it means. That's stage one.
It's called leverage. Yeah, it's called leverage.
It is leverage. So I went back to Kana, private message on Twitter, and I said, Congressman, we'll go ahead and ask Mike Honda to sign the contract if you don't want to. About an hour or two later, I noticed I had a message. I looked at it and said, I'll sign.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. But look, you got him to take a position and you got him to nail down that position. That's a good thing, man. I mean,
yeah, it is. It is. So now there's a lot of people who said, oh, he's a neoliberal. He's two-faced.
Well,
he tweets very progressive.
Well, he's stuck with the confines of that letter. I mean,
he is stuck with the confines of that contract. Absolutely right.
And
I have the copy of it. He signed it and sent it to me, so it's in my hands.
This weird thing of well, I said I was going to make America great, and look, the stock market is that whatever. It's specific. I mean, that's like I try to get like people get lost in language sometimes. You know, like Obama would give the soaring rhetoric speech, and people are like, oh my God, he's awesome, and he didn't say anything. Yeah, he was like, he said nothing. And that speech was empty platitudes. He just said it really well.
Who do you think, Jamara? Who do you think is a more effective con man? Barack Obama, who pretended to be a progressive and ran and governed as a moderate Republican, or Donald Trump, who ran as a populist and is governing as a plutocrat?
So Obama is more of a con man, but let me explain why. Trump, I was never conned by Trump. Like Donald Trump, I said to myself, this guy's a blue-collar billionaire. This guy has only looked out for himself his entire life. And he is a salesman. He's telling them anything that they want to say here. And they fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. With Obama, he ran as if he was going to be this flaming leftist. Like in his earliest speeches, you know, he's talking about public option and all this other stuff. He's talking about closing Guantanamo and this and that. And then he gets in office and he governs as a, Republican. And then it's like people were like, all right, he needs 4 years. Once he gets past his 4-year mark, Obama's going to rip the chains off and he's just going to be this, hawk out in office. No such thing. No such thing. He lost me completely during the TPP thing. When it's like, he's like, trust me, the TPP is progressive legislation. It's the most progressive trade deal. And it's on WikiLeaks. Like he's saying this when you can actually read the document. And you're reading the document and they're giving over United States sovereignty to corporate interests. Like it's an amazing thing to read. And then to see the president at the exact same time saying, this is the most progressive trade deal. One of these things are not telling me the truth. And I'm reading the document, or you hear the prime minister, I think it was like of Australia, New Zealand, saying that it wasn't supposed to come to fruition, meaning people weren't even supposed to see it until like 4 years after it's published. Like
that's what's on the stamped on the front cover of every chapter.
It is so gross. It's so gross. So when you're asking me who's a bigger con man, well, one guy is trying to sell over United States sovereignty to corporate interests. I don't know what Donald Trump is going to end up doing. Donald Trump
that may happen. That may happen under Trump too.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I guess my point is I had no illusions of Trump. Like I knew, all right, this man is going to be incompetent and this man is profoundly dangerous. That was my feelings with Donald Trump. There, at the very least, he's going to kill the TPP. At the very least, he's trying to be conciliatory towards Russia, something that Democrats aren't doing. And at the very least, Democrats look like they were going to get us into another war, meaning a world war with Russia. I had some hope that Trump wouldn't do that. I felt it was a Hobbes choice. I felt both choices were going to be bad. But from the standpoint of which one I had more hopes for, you had people crying on the White House lawn when Obama was elected. Do you remember that? Like Jesse Jackson was bawling. He was like, tears were, and you look at this moment. I remember the moment. I remember exactly where I was at the time where Obama was elected. And, this level of hope and this level of what the presidency could be, what the presidency could mean. You had people talking about like a new Jack Kennedy and all this other stuff. And it's like slowly, very slowly, the shackles fell from my eyes, or the scales fell from my eyes. And it's like, okay, not so much.
Yeah.
We've been had.
I know. I think
you have a house.
Steve Hilton, the host of The Next Revolution, reminds me of me, and from what you're saying, you, in the early days after Obama, right? Yeah. That we thought this was going to be a progressive thing, and slowly, I think Steve Hilton still believes in candidate Trump. I don't think he's opened his eyes yet, and he just doesn't want to see that President Trump is just same
thing. It's the same quantity. It's Obama, for the standpoint of Republicans. It's literally Obama cut for Republicans. It's instead of hope and change, it's like make America great again. It's these other slogans that Republicans love. And you have all these people who are looking for something fundamentally different. They just want something different. And
it's different, all right. It's neoliberalism on steroids.
It's the ugly face of America ripped off. I mean, it's where you had platitudes and you had Obama with this really good face on these policies. You get Trump. And Trump does not have a good face on this stuff. Like, he's doing similar things. So it's not like what he's doing is wildly different. If you know what I mean? It's like their understanding of reality is for the most part the same. They're just in different spectrum in this way. I was more disappointed with the Obama thing. I mean, the Trump thing.
What was your other questions about the summit?
Oh, yeah, the Unrig summit. So 2 questions. I probably have more after this because it's going to lead to it. But what did you think they were trying to accomplish with the Unrig summit? I mean, I know what the name is, but what do you think the way they were pulling themselves together, meaning the sessions or the way the sessions were arranged? What was the ultimate goal of the summit? I mean, because ultimately the goal, they weren't going to unrig the system. So not just with one summit. So what was the goal of the summit? And do you think that goal was accomplished?
I'm not sure. I didn't go to the closing plenary session because I had an airplane to catch to get back here and go to work on Monday. So I'm not sure if there had an overarching goal other than the obvious thing to, start getting people organized and focused in on trying to get the system unrigged. The problem is, so I opened my remarks at the session that we held with the observation that their website had 2 tabs, a policy tab and an advocacy tab. But they didn't have an electoral tab. There was no presentation on how to get these candidates who want to unrig the system elected to Congress. And that's what we were trying to do in our session. So I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not sure what it was they were actually trying to do other than help people understand that Republicans, there are good Republicans. They're not all out to make America ugly again.
Essentially, give them something to focus on. Do you think these type of things work? I've been to the People's Summit. I've been to the Left Forum. I've been to the Anti-War Conference. There was one more, the Convergence Conference. I've been to a few of these conferences. Do you think these ultimately work, I guess, in their aims of organization, meaning, I guess, bringing people together for some particular goal? And if so, I got to be honest, I haven't necessarily seen it. I know just interacting with one another and meeting other people who are in the same field. But in regards to actually getting things accomplished from a legislative standpoint, do you think these have any consequence at all?
Not in the short run. There's nothing I've seen so far. And how did I miss you at the Convergence Conference?
I was there.
I don't remember seeing you.
I was at one of I was on one of the panels at the end. It was a panel with Brana. The woman who you mentioned as being the person who was running Burning a Bus, for C4Ls. I think she was on my panel, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm mistaken. No, no, not Kelly. The woman who you mentioned before. I think it's for Bernie or Bus. And I can't pronounce her name.
Yane? Yane
Yes.
was on a panel.
Yeah, I think she was on that panel. It was me, Brana, her, and Eleanor Goldfield, if I'm not mistaken. On it's like the future of politics. Like, what's the ultimate point? What's the ultimate goal? What's the left trying to move towards? That type of stuff.
So they may have an effect in the long run. The short run best effect that they have are networking, right?
Okay.
Because I met a lot of people, I gathered a lot of business cards down there, and I was able to, link up with people. There's 2 or 3 candidates that I've reached out to, so we might get more CFAR candidates as a result of that. But as far as actually having a good result, I don't think that will be the case. Now, let me address this very directly. I don't want to say personally, but from an organizational CFAR perspective. We weren't on the schedule. They had this HUVA application. They had the entire schedule for all these sessions for the entire weekend. But all the organizations like ours that donated $500 to become co-sponsors of this summit weren't put on the schedule. I guess there were 5 or 6 organizations down there. Some of those organizations wanted private meetings, and some of us wanted open meetings and to invite the public to. And because they didn't want, because it was too much work or for whatever reason, they decided to leave us all off the schedule. And I'll tell you, being off the schedule was devastating because we were down there. We were the only ones down there with an election strategy to how to get candidates who want to unrig the system elected to Congress. So we held the session Sunday morning. We aimed for Saturday afternoon, then it overlapped with a couple of very important other sessions. So we said, no, let's move it to Sunday morning. And the problem with that is nobody came. I mean, virtually nobody came. 3 people attended our session. Other sessions, they just didn't know about it. Even though I produced 1,100 quarter sheet flyers, we handed out 950 of those quarter sheet flyers. My wife asked me when I got home, was it worth it? And I have to say, no. We haven't gotten any candidates yet. We haven't gotten any activists. 950 people took a flyer that had the website going to, the cfarmovement.us URL, pointing them to the original Burn Your Bus website so that they could sign up as a CFAR activist. Nobody has signed up. So I don't think it was worth it from my perspective. And so as far as going back to your question, what will come of this? Probably nothing, because they didn't seem to have much of an interest in an election strategy, any election strategy, to get people who are seriously committed to unrig the system elected to Congress, right? There was no strategy other than how do you fight money in politics? Well, here's some things to say. Here's some things not to say. If you can't afford polling, here's how you can get around that. You can cheat, sort of. So, well, I mean, it's not cheating. It's just sort of looking over it. If you think about taking a test in school and you don't have, you look over the paper. Oh, all right, it's a C. You can do that for a platform too, right? If you don't know where the people stand on a particular issue and you can't afford polls, just go to someone's website and look where they stand on it, because if they're well-funded candidate, they've probably done the polling. They know where the people stand on this. Just basically copy their positions. If you don't, if you can't afford polling, that was a recommendation.
That's funny. Yeah, that's problematic. I mean, because they're assuming that the elections themselves are fair. Like that there's nothing wrong with the electoral process itself. The problem just boils down to money. And then when you're talking about unrigging a system, you're talking about the money part of the process.
There was very little recognition and discussion. There's very little thinking outside the box that I found, or Kelly noticed. There was just it was very conventional thinking about running elections, and leverage just wasn't on their minds. It wasn't something people thought of, and I think they probably looked at my little quarter sheet flyers and thought, boy, these people, where's their 3-color,
well, leverage
print sheets. I said, we're as grassroots as it comes. This is my
Well,
free laser printer here, black and white.
you can kind of understand it. I mean, if you're a politician and you're, for the most part, the politicians who are there are mainstream. They're not. I know Larry Lessig is there. Larry Lessig ran for president at one point, trying to get money out of politics. I know his platform was, I will be a one-issue president, and I would resign, leaving my vice president to take the office after that. That was his like gimmick when he ran.
It's in his book, Republic Lost. He covers that strategy.
Oh, okay, that strategy. Yeah, but they don't. I would imagine if you have politicians there, the idea of having some kind of constraint on their behavior. Because understand the CFAR thing, if you're not on board with it, like if you're not a lefty, you're going to have some qualms about signing that. And not the very issue that you have qualms, or the very fact that you have qualms signing it, is going to put a spotlight on the fact that you have qualms signing it. It's like, regardless of what your language is saying, at the end of the day, if you can't support policies that the majority of the population supports, it shows just by virtue of you not signing it. These type of things, my feeling was, so I had a similar feeling that you had. Now, I didn't necessarily have a platform to present or anything else. I guess I just left the People's Summit and maybe even the left forum. And I felt like, okay, the sessions were interesting. The sessions were nice. It's nice to kind of bump into other lefties. Like, you know, everybody's there for the most part of lefties. But I felt like, now what? It's like you leave, you walk out, you get back on your bus to go home. Now what? It felt like, you know, like you go to a church service and then you leave and, you know, you're sinner for the rest of the week. It's like, what? I couldn't figure out what was the point or what was the thing that was supposed to be gotten out of these things. It's one thing if they say we're having a People's Summit and they bring these groups together and these guys are having like votes on policy and what you know, you're going to present, and they're having debates on what you want to espouse as a left or something like that. That makes sense to me. You know, you go to pay a bunch of money and you go to a session and then another session, then another session, then somebody speaks and everybody leaves. And it's always, for me, this feeling after going to like 3 or 4 of these, now what? Did you get that feeling, or did you have a different experience from this? I know from the standpoint of you interacting, like you giving a presentation, they kind of gut you because they didn't necessarily put that particular thing on the agenda. But from the standpoint of somebody who's just going to the Unrig Summit itself, somebody who's, you know, going to some of the other sessions and everything else, what was your ending experience? What was the thing that you left with? Did you find it to be, okay, this was worthwhile, or did you get also, now what?
No, it definitely was not worthwhile.
Yeah.
I think most people are going to be sort of like myself. They went down there, they have their thing that they're doing, whatever that thing is, End Citizens United, or, you know, the democracy matrix, or whatever it is they're working on. They went down there, they presented it, they go back and they just continue doing their work. And it was an opportunity to network with maybe like-minded people. But it's hard to say if anything really specific was accomplished there, and that stems out of it. Now, one thing I did, Jeff Clements has an organization. He was with Free Speech for People, and now he's got another organization. They're working on overturning Citizens United. There was this big division and split from Move to Amend that I was actually part of a couple of years ago. They wanted us to suddenly sign this memo of understanding, which basically handcuffed us in a lot of ways. It restricted certain things that we were doing, and we looked at it and said, no thanks. And probably about 15 chapters from around the country just said no thanks.
No thanks.
So at the time we were going to start a new organization, and then it turns out Move to Amend sued us, the people who were behind, you know, leading the organization. By then I had already broken off and started Bernie or Bust. So they sued them because the name they picked was a little too close to Move to Amend, and apparently some people took Move to Amend data off their website, off their nation builder list of people who've signed the Move to Amend petition. So they sued them about that too, and they ended up not going and doing anything. So I asked Jeff Clements, very quick conversation because he was, or very quick question because he was in a conversation, if former Move to Amend people can join his organization. His answer was yes. So that was it. I walked away. And that's something that can come out of this, is that these break-off groups that didn't want to sign this memo of understanding, might now work with Jeff Clement's new group. So
Nice.
there's things that come about that can actually maybe make a difference in the long run, but I think in the short run, I think what you're missing and what you're looking for out of a convention is a party building thing.
Maybe
That's what they were trying to do at the convergence, and I think that sort of didn't happen there because it was right about the time that they were figuring out that Bernie Sanders was not going to start a new party.
Right. Right. I hope Bronner knew that. Like, I don't think Bronner was surprised that Bernie Sanders didn't show up. The funny part is I always laugh because it's like Draft Sanders, as if Draft Sanders is a name and Bernie Sanders, last name is the Sanders. Is like his bastardized child that he never acknowledges and never realizes.
We didn't know that, but his middle name was Draft.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm looking for something that is impossible to get from those things. I guess my feeling is, if you're going to take that much time to have a festival, if you're going to charge that much to do it, if you're going to put it somewhere where people are going to have to travel to, make it worthwhile. And you have all of these lefty groups. Like, I mean, I was amazed at the People Summit. You had like 20 booths. All of them are, for the most part, the same. Like, if you put all of them on a spectrum, let's say from 1 to 100, and let's say the lefty end of the spectrum is, going from 0 to whatever, all of those guys will be between like 20 and 30. Like the degree of separation between those groups is minor. It's just this degree of distinction that they, this guy's socialist alternative, this guy's socialist select, this guy calls himself a progressive, this guy calls himself a lefty Democrat, this guy doesn't even consider himself on the spectrum, but ultimately he really is on the spectrum, he's just a socialist. Like, it's stuff like that, where you have all of these guys spread out in this entire auditorium, and at the end of the day, all those guys should be in one party. And all those guys would be in one party. Like, the distinctions between them are so minor, and yet they find these reasons to be something separate and distinct. This other person is a Green Party member. That Green Party member, for all intents and purposes, is just like the other members there. Like, there may be certain emphasis and everything else, but from the confines or the context of American politics, they are within a few percentage points of one another on some kind of political spectrum. That was probably the most aggravating part of the People Summit. I kept thinking to myself, all of you guys are the same. All of you guys are the same. All of you guys, for the most part, are touting the exact same thing. Somebody has
we had better figure out some way to get our crap together here soon, because climate change is basically changing everything. It's become urgent. It's an oncoming crisis, and nothing's getting done about it.
Not just nothing's done, we're ill prepared to get anything done on anything. Like, think of all the issues that are addressing the society. And I'm talking about just any random society. Think of all the things that need to take place. There will be some times where, the society goes through ebb and flow and everything else. But we have actual issues, like real issues. If you're talking about technological unemployment, that's a real thing. If you, like you said, climate change, that's a real thing. And that's something that's a deal breaker. Like, that's not something where you just find a solution for. That's something that gets progressively worse and worse and worse and worse. We keep putting Democrats in office. And it's like, they're like, well, hey, man, if you believe in climate change, put a Democrat in. You meaning the one who was perfectly okay with, selling fracking all over the world? If you're going to hit a wall at 60 miles an hour, or if you hit it at 90 miles an hour with a Republican, you're still dead all the same. And they keep forgetting that.
Yeah. It's like I said, we had better figure this out quickly and figure out some way to use the internet. I can't think of another way of doing it. I advocated this in the original essay on standing on the edge of the next American Revolution, that we've got to figure out some way to use this internet and get low budget progressives elected. There's one very interesting candidate. She's a CFAR candidate running for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. She's attempting to do it. Her name's Marcia Squire. She's attempting to do it on a $5,000 budget.
Oh wow!
So, she's aiming to do something innovative and pioneering, and she's a CFAR candidate, so we'll be helping out. I got to get a blast out to all the the busters in Michigan and ask them to help her, not so much donate money, but at this point, ballots are circulating, and she's got thousands that need to be collected. So
yeah,
I want them to sign up and volunteer on our list. That's what we're trying to do. Our whole effort is to get people to volunteer get involved, get active, boots on the ground. And a lot of it can be done online. If it's somebody can't get out and walk around, then there's a lot of things that they can do online. But this isn't clickivism. This, when I talk about online activism, it's not clickivism. It's not signing a petition. It's getting out there, getting voters to take the CFAR pledge, getting candidates to sign the contract. This is a very dynamic, mostly online, 99% online strategy. I think we need to be pioneers and innovators on using this amazing machine, not just having face-to-face conversations like we're having now, but really changing the world. We can change the world. And we have this amazing communication machine that the right-wingers are figuring out how to use. The Koch brothers are figuring out how to use this machine. We have to figure out how to use this machine too. And now that we've got net neutrality overturned, we have to go back to basics and old-fashioned strategies, namely, specifically, email. Right? We can communicate with email, but so many people right now aren't even opening their email because we're just awash in dozens of emails that come in every day. I'm guilty of that as anyone. I come home and I delete 3/4, 80, 95% of the emails that come in and deal with the ones that I have to deal with before I start making a video for this or interviewing a candidate for that. And there's so many things that we're working on right now that
inundated with them.
It's hard. Yeah. And now that Burn Your Bus is published, I basically have 3 full-time jobs, right? I have a full-time job that pays the rent. I'm now promoting Burn Your Bus. A lot of people actually quit their job to go out and promote the book that they publish. And I'm organizing, one of the key organizers of the CFRL. So in effect, I have 3 full-time jobs that I'm juggling at this time.
I'm curious, how do you handle, I'm curious about this one. How do you handle the job and the extra stuff? Like that's it. Like, like you said, you have your full-time job that essentially pays the rent. And you have the other job that handles the other stuff. How do you balance those 2 things? And do they come in conflict? Like, okay.
Yeah, they do. One of the things I'm able to do while I'm at work, I don't want to go into too many details because it's a violation of company rules.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry.
So I'm not going to go into details, but I actually do promotional work now that Burn Your Bus is out, and I can point people to the place on the publisher's website where this book exists. I've actually spent the day promoting the book on Twitter and Facebook. I have to be very careful on Facebook because they throw you in jail for posting too quickly on various groups. But that's something I do while I'm working. And I can't go into too much detail because
I don't want you to.
Pretty much not only a violation of company rules, but the law as well. So there's that sort of overlap that I'm able to do. And then, I've never had 3 full-time jobs before. I knew this book was coming out and I knew this was going to be an awesome burden. And basically you just do the best you can. Now, during Burn Your Bus, there was an adrenaline factor there that I can't very well explain, but it was, I was sleeping 5 hours a night.
Yeah.
Right. So that gave me a lot of time to do things. But at this point, I'm still in a recuperating mode. My body's just not letting me sleep that little yet. Because I wasn't setting an alarm to get up at 5 in the morning. I was just getting up at 5 in the morning. I'd lay there and I think, well, I might as well go get some work done. So you just do the best you can. And it is stressful on family life. It's my wife feels neglected quite often. And I really need to wrap this up because she's come home from work and I need to address that aspect of my life that does get neglected.
The other woman. I always joke that my wife is the other woman. Speaking of my wife, she's asking she's giving $2. That's cute. She's putting money in the tip jar. Where does everyone live, state and country? Yeah, I know how you feel on that one. I would come home and then spend another 4 or 5 hours doing videos. And it's like the entirety of your day. By the time you get up that morning and go to bed at night, you're going to bed at night at like 12 o'clock. And that's just like day after day after day after day after day. Yeah, it becomes a little rough. It becomes a bit rough. I've gotten to the point where I've decided that I want to expand the channel. And it's like, all right, so how do you mend that? How do you mend those things? Like what taking a position that would allow more time to do the videos with the idea that the videos is going to expand. But yeah, it's not easy, man. It's like you're trying to meld two worlds together.
It's very, very stressful, and hopefully I'll come out of this at the end still married.
Well, you're you're still married. At least I hope you will be. My wife has been a little bit more understanding about it, but I understand it, so I'm not going to hold you. Is there anything else you want to give information-wise to the public before we call this quits?
Well, I mean, even if you don't want to get involved as an activist because you have your plate full, then go to cfarvoter.us, as in the United States, cfarvoter.us, and just take the voter pledge, right? Build yourself, make yourself part of this leverage, right? If thousands of people sign this pledge, then the candidates are going to go, whoa, if I don't sign the contract, I'm not going to get elected. And that's the whole idea. We literally want to compel candidates, if they want to or not, to sign the contract and go to Congress in the next session of Congress and do the people's business. That's what makes this revolutionary. Normally revolutions are coupled to a revolutionary party. Well, we don't have, people aren't voting green, but people might support a revolutionary agenda, right? So the idea is to substitute for a revolutionary party a revolutionary manifesto. And that's what we're using the Contract for American Renewal to do. So go to cfarvoter.us, take that pledge, and then if you have time and you can actually go to a candidate and ask them to sign the contract, then go to cfarmovement.us, sign up and watch the tutorials. We have tutorials that show people how to ask a candidate to sign the contract and get involved. I mean, this is a revolution. You can't, it's not the time for our armchair revolutionaries, even though with this particular strategy, because we have the internet, you can still sit down and do this work.
But what would have been the outcome? And just, I'm not going to hold you, but I'm just curious about your answer on this. If instead of saying vote Hillary, what would have been the outcome if major networks, major lefty indie networks would have said, you know what, we're not towing a particular line if you don't vote a particular way, and using that threat as leverage to try to compel candidates, or at the very least to allow that threat to be out there of, we're not good at telling our network to vote Hillary if you guys do X, as opposed to just kind of going along with the, well, Hillary won. Well, let's just go along with Hillary Clinton. Yeah, she cheated our guy, but let's just go along with this person. What would have been the result, do you think, from the Democratic standpoint? How do you think Democrats, meaning elected officials, would have taken this idea of TYT saying, we're not falling in line, we're not on board with this particular policy? And this isn't me hitting at TYT. TYT turned its network to go towards Hillary Clinton at the end of the primaries. I guess I'm asking, if they went along with the Bernie or bust strategy, do you think that would have had any kind of impact in the way that these guys behave in regards to politics?
Yeah, but if it hadn't been just TYT, I mean, if they had done it, if Jank had figured out that the system's rigged, and if they don't have some sort of counter leverage strategy, Bernie's not going to get elected. And of course, we did have H.A. Goodman who was supporting us, and Tim Black was Bernier Black, and of course Nico. But if it had been a lot more people who had actually embraced this, from the Young Turks to just a lot of people on the left, and I'm trying to think of other examples of people out there who could have embraced this and didn't. Because there's the Real News Network, for example. It's a good news network, but they don't necessarily take positions. But
they kind of like Chris Hedges took a strong position with the Bernie or bust thing when they had him on Democracy Now! He was going against Robert Wright. Paul J had Abby Martin. Abby Martin was going against him. She was Bernie or bust. There were a few. I mean, they had people on who would have that argument with Paul J on whether or not it was a good idea to go with the Bernie or bust strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if Robert Reich is an example. He wouldn't do Bernie or bust. He
wouldn't do it at all.
He was going to line up with the Clintons. Of course, he's friends with them, but just a whole lot of people who were terrified of Bernie or bust because, oh my God, that you're going to lead to Donald Trump. No, get on board, get behind this strategy, and we'll end up with President Sanders.
Yeah,
right, because the system's rigged, and if you don't tilt that playing field back the other way, then you're going to end up with a choice between a gunshot to the chest and an arrow in the back, which is exactly what we end up with.
Is that what they call it? Yeah. Dude, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the Unrig Summit and talking about your book. This is the author of Bernie or Bust, Victor Tiffany. Guys, thank Victor Tiffany for coming on. They can't, I'm pretty sure they're clapping at home.
Yeah, I appreciate you. And just one more reminder, it's bernieorbust.info where you can find the book.
Very nice. All right, guys, I'm going to close it. Guys, thank you for showing up. Thank you for, thank you for letting us entertain. So I'm going to end it. If you guys enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe. And of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Thanks, everyone. Let's see.